Rancher inherits a lethal cabin and finds Apache girl hung inside. The morning was quiet on the ranch, as it often was. The sun rose slowly, painting the open fields with a golden glow. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the wind moved gently through the tall grass. For the rancher, life had always been about routine. Days were long and work was hard, but it was honest. He loved the peace of the land, the feeling of soil under his boots, and the rhythm of caring for animals and crops. Life was simple, and he liked it that way. One morning, while he was finishing his breakfast, a letter arrived. It was unusual, thicker than normal mail, with an official seal stamped in red. Curious, he opened it carefully. The letter was from a lawyer in a nearby town.
It said that he had inherited a property from a relative he had never met. A cabin far away in a remote area had now become his.
The words on the page seemed almost unreal. He had never expected anything like this. He barely knew this branch of his family, and suddenly, a piece of their life had landed in his hands. At first, he laughed to himself. "A cabin," he said aloud. "I wonder what I'll even find there." But as he read more, he noticed a small line at the end that made his stomach tighten. The lawyer had mentioned that the cabin had been empty for years, and locals spoke of it in whispers, hinting at a dark past. There were no details, only a warning that it might not be as simple as it seemed. He put the letter down, a sense of unease settling over him. He tried to shake it off. After all, it was just a cabin, and perhaps it was a chance for adventure, something different from the quiet life he had always known. Over the next few days, he made preparations. He packed tools, supplies, and a flashlight. He told himself he was going to inspect the cabin, make a few repairs, and then leave if it felt too strange. The thought of being somewhere unfamiliar didn't bother him. He had traveled across the land before, managing different parts of the ranch. But there was something about this place that felt heavier, almost like a shadow he couldn't see. The journey to the cabin was long. He drove through winding roads, past thick forests, and over hills where the grass grew tall and wild. The air was cooler here, fresher than he was used to. Birds and animals moved silently in the trees, and there was a strange stillness that followed him. As he got closer, he noticed signs of abandonment. The road became rougher, the trees grew closer, and the cabin itself appeared suddenly through the forest like a forgotten memory. The cabin was old, made of dark, weathered wood. Its roof had patches missing, and the windows were dusty and cracked. Despite this, there was a strange beauty in it. It looked like it had once been cared for, loved even, but time had not been kind. The rancher stepped out of his truck, the gravel crunching beneath his boots, and looked at the structure with a mix of curiosity and caution. He felt a shiver, though the morning was warm. Something about the silence around the cabin felt different from the rest of the land. He approached slowly, his hands resting lightly on his belt. The door creaked as he opened it, the sound echoing into the empty space. Inside, the cabin was dark, with beams of sunlight cutting through the cracks in the walls. Dust floated in the air, and every step he took stirred it up. The smell of old wood and time hung heavy in the air. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made him stop for a moment and listen. Even the wind seemed to pause before entering the cabin. As he walked through the rooms, he noticed remnants of life long gone. A broken chair in the corner, an old rug faded by sunlight. A small table with scratches on its surface. It was clear that someone had lived here once and that their life had been interrupted suddenly. His heart beat a little faster. He had inherited something more than just a cabin. He had inherited a story, one he did not yet understand. He continued exploring. Every step seemed heavier than the last. The shadows of the room moved with the sunlight, creating shapes that were almost human. The rancher shook his head and laughed nervously. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself. But deep down, he felt a sense of tension he could not explain. There was a weight in the air, a feeling that the cabin was waiting for him, watching him even. He reached the back room and his steps slowed. The floorboards groaned under his weight, and the silence pressed against his ears. He stopped in the doorway, squinting in the dim light. Something was different here. something he could not name.
His instincts, honed by years of working on the ranch and dealing with unpredictable situations, told him to be careful. He took a deep breath and stepped inside.
It was then that he noticed it, a figure still and silent, hanging from a beam. The rancher froze. His mind could not process it at first. He rubbed his eyes, thinking the morning light had played a trick on him. But the figure remained, unmoving. A chill ran down his spine. The room was no longer just quiet. It was heavy, filled with sorrow and tragedy. The rancher felt his stomach tighten and his hands shook slightly. He moved closer, heart pounding, trying to understand what he was seeing. It was a young girl, her features delicate, her clothes simple. There was no movement, no sign of life. The realization hit him like a wave. She was gone. She had been there for a long time, abandoned and alone. The weight of the moment crushed him. He felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, shock, sorrow, and a sense of responsibility he had never expected. For a long moment, he simply stood there, staring. Memories of his own family, his own childhood, and the quiet life he had led filled his mind. How could such tragedy happen in a place so isolated, so peaceful on the surface? He felt the need to act, to honor her, to make sure her story was not forgotten. But first, he had to alert someone. Carefully, he stepped back, his hands trembling slightly, and went outside to make a call. The phone call was brief but intense. Authorities arrived and the rancher answered their questions honestly, though his mind kept drifting back to the girl. Every detail of the cabin, every sound, every shadow seemed to whisper her story.
As the officials took over, he walked around outside, trying to gather his thoughts.
The sky was bright now, the sun higher in the morning, but the world felt different. The beauty of the land could not erase the weight of what he had discovered inside. Neighbors and locals began to speak in hushed tones. Some remembered the cabin, some had only heard rumors. The rancher listened quietly, piecing together small bits of information. The cabin had a history, and though no one had spoken openly about it for years, the stories were always there, hidden beneath layers of time and silence. He realized that he had not just inherited a building, he had inherited a chapter of someone else's life, a life that had ended too soon and too tragically. As the day wore on, the rancher stayed by the cabin. He could not bring himself to leave. He walked the perimeter, observing the land, the trees, the paths that led to the cabin. It was beautiful, but it felt like it belonged to someone else now. He thought of the girl, imagining what her life might have been, what her dreams were, and how she had ended up here. The questions had no answers yet, but he felt a deep need to find them. By evening, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the fields. The rancher sat on a fallen log nearby, exhausted but alert. He thought about the journey ahead. There would be investigations, conversations, and perhaps answers that were difficult to hear. But he also knew one thing. He could not ignore this. The cabin, the girl, and the story she carried had become a part of his life. And somehow, he felt that he had been chosen to carry it forward, to honor her memory in a way that mattered. As darkness fell, the rancher looked back at the cabin one last time. It was silent now, the shadows stretching long and thin across the ground. He felt a chill, but also a strange resolve. Tomorrow, he would begin to uncover the truth. Tomorrow, he would step fully into the story he had inherited, ready to face whatever it might reveal. For now, he let the night settle around him, carrying with it the weight of sorrow, the spark of curiosity, and the quiet promise of a life forever changed. The next morning, the rancher woke early, still haunted by what he had seen the day before. The memory of the girl in the cabin stayed with him, lingering in the corners of his mind. He couldn't shake it. Even as he fed the animals back at his ranch, he found himself thinking about her. Who was she? How had she come to be there? And why had no one discovered her until now? These questions weighed heavily on him. After breakfast, he packed a small bag with essentials, a notebook, a camera, and his old flashlight. He felt that he needed to record everything.
Every detail of the cabin, every corner, every sign might be important later. Even though the authorities had been there, he had a sense that he needed to see it with his own eyes again.
The journey to the cabin was quieter this time. The forest seemed even more still, almost as if it were waiting for him. When he arrived, the cabin looked the same from the outside, dark, silent, and isolated. But this time, he wasn't opening the door blindly. He paused, taking in every sound, the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional bird, the soft crunch of gravel beneath his boots. The air felt heavier here, as if the memory of the girl had seeped into the walls. He took a deep breath, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The room was unchanged.
Dust floated in the air, catching the beams of sunlight streaming through the windows. The furniture, the old rug, the broken chair, they all seemed frozen in time.
But the girl's presence was still felt, even though she was gone. Her story lingered in the silence. The rancher walked slowly, carefully, noticing small things he had not seen before. A small toy tucked in a corner, a ribbon on the floor, marks on the wooden beams. These subtle details hinted at a life that had been interrupted too soon. He took out his notebook and began jotting down observations. Every detail mattered.
Even the smallest clue could lead to understanding what had happened.
The rancher's mind worked quickly, recalling every bit of experience he had from managing the ranch, solving problems, and reading situations carefully. He moved through the cabin, pausing often, listening.
Sometimes the silence felt like it was pressing in, and he had to step outside to breathe, to remind himself that he was not alone. By mid-morning, local authorities arrived again. They were polite and professional, but the rancher could see the weight of the discovery on their faces. They were here to investigate further, to record evidence, and try to understand what had happened.
He spoke with them quietly, giving them information about what he had found, what he remembered, and what he noticed now.
His voice was steady, but inside he felt a storm of emotions, grief for the girl, anger at the circumstances, and a sense of responsibility he had never expected. The authorities allowed him to stay while they worked, knowing that he had inherited the cabin and that he had been the one to find her. He moved carefully through the space, trying not to disturb anything, yet wanting to understand everything.
With each step, he felt a growing determination. He could not leave this place as it was.
He had to know her story. He had to find out who she was and why she had ended up in the cabin.
Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting strong shadows across the forest. The rancher stepped onto the porch, looking around at the surrounding land.
The cabin was deep in the woods, far from neighbors and town. He realized that this isolation had probably played a role in her being unnoticed for so long. It made him feel both sadness and anger. How could someone be left alone like this, so far from help? He shivered slightly at the thought, but he refused to let despair take hold. As the day went on, he began asking questions. He spoke with a few neighbors who lived nearby, people who had seen the cabin from afar or had passed through the area years ago. Most of them remembered it as a quiet place, a cabin that had always seemed abandoned. Some spoke in hushed tones, hinting that the cabin had always carried a shadow of mystery. The rancher listened carefully, noting every detail, even the smallest rumor. He knew that somewhere in these stories he might find a clue. Later, he visited a nearby town where he spoke with local officials and people who had connections with the area. He asked about missing persons, about any reports that might relate to the girl. He discovered that there had been reports of a young Apache girl who had disappeared months before. Her name, her age, and the details matched what little he knew from what he saw in the cabin. The realization hit him hard. She had been missing for a long time, and somehow her life had ended in this lonely cabin. The rancher felt a mix of emotions he could not easily name. Sadness, because her life had been so short and so tragic. Frustration, because perhaps things could have been different if help had come sooner. And determination, because he realized that he had been placed in this situation for a reason. He could not undo what had happened, but he could honor her memory. He could make sure that her story was known and remembered. As evening approached, the rancher returned to the cabin one more time. The forest around him was quiet, the wind soft, and the shadows long.
Inside, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. He walked slowly through each room, noticing again the little details that told the story of the girl's life. The ribbons, the marks on the furniture, the small personal items. All of these were pieces of a life that had been lived and then ended too soon. He sat down on the floor in the back room, the place where he had first seen her.
For a long time, he said nothing. He simply let the silence surround him. He thought about the girl, her family, her friends, her dreams. He imagined the laughter she might have shared, the joy she might have experienced, and the sadness she had endured. His heart ached for her, and he felt a deep responsibility to ensure that she would not be forgotten. During the night, he camped near the cabin, unable to leave. He felt that the land, the cabin, and the girl's story were all intertwined with him now. He could not walk away and pretend it had not happened. He kept watch, listening to the sounds of the forest, noting the way the wind moved through the trees and the creaking of the old cabin. Every noise reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of paying attention, of caring, of remembering. By the next morning, the rancher had made a decision. He would begin a careful, respectful investigation into the girl's story. He would speak to the Apache community, learn what he could about her life, and see if there were family members who needed to know what had happened. He knew this would be a delicate process. He would need to approach with care, respect, and honesty, but he also knew it was the right thing to do.
He returned to town and began making the necessary arrangements. He spoke with social workers, community leaders, and people who had worked with missing children.
He gathered as much information as he could, always mindful of the sensitivity of the situation. Each step brought new insight, and each step reinforced his determination to honor the girl. He kept thinking about how she had ended up alone in that cabin, and what could have been done to prevent it. Through it all, the rancher felt a growing sense of purpose. The cabin, which had once seemed like a burden, now felt like a responsibility he had been entrusted with. He realized that inheritance was not always about property or money. It was sometimes about taking care of stories, memories, and lives that needed attention. The girl had been invisible to the world for too long, but he would make sure she was seen now. As Part 2 came to a close, the rancher stood once more outside the cabin, looking at the forest, the land, and the old wooden structure. The sun was higher now, shining warmly over the trees, yet the shadow of what had happened lingered. He took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and the significance of what lay ahead. The story was only beginning, and he knew that uncovering the truth about the girl's life would take time, patience, and courage. But he was ready to face it. The cabin was no longer just a building. It was a silent witness to a life that had ended too soon, and the rancher was now its keeper. He understood that his role was not just to inherit a property, but to carry forward a story, to seek understanding, and to honor the memory of the girl whose life had been hidden in the shadows. And with that understanding, he took his first steps toward uncovering the truth, knowing that the journey would be difficult but necessary. After days of reflection and quiet determination, the rancher knew he could not just stay on the sidelines. The girl's life had ended tragically, but it was not too late to honor her memory and discover the story that had been lost for so long. He made a list of people he needed to speak with: neighbors, local authorities, and most importantly, members of the Apache community who might know more about her family and her life. He understood that approaching this community would require respect and care. He wanted to listen, not judge, and learn everything he could. He started his day by revisiting the nearby town where officials and social workers had given him preliminary information. He met with a community liaison who had experience helping families of missing children. Together, they went over the details of the girl's disappearance. Her name, age, and the circumstances surrounding her last known movements were carefully documented. The rancher took notes, asking questions with genuine curiosity and concern. Each detail painted a picture of a bright young life interrupted far too early. After gathering all the official information, he decided to visit the Apache community. He approached slowly, aware that he was an outsider. He introduced himself politely, explaining the situation and his desire to understand more about the girl he had found. Initially, there was caution.
The community had faced many tragedies and had often been misunderstood by outsiders.
But his sincerity showed. People began to share memories, small pieces of her life, her laughter, her habits, and her dreams.
Each story added a layer to the image of a young girl who had been full of life and hope. One elder spoke softly about the girl's family, describing her parents and siblings.
They had loved her dearly, and the community had mourned deeply when she went missing. The rancher listened carefully, taking mental notes.
He realized that he was not just uncovering facts, he was connecting with a community that had experienced loss and grief. The elder spoke about the importance of memory and respect, emphasizing that the girl's life must be honored through understanding and compassion.
The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of this responsibility. With the information from the community, he began piecing together the girl's last days. He learned about her routines, the people she trusted, and the challenges she faced. There were mentions of people who had tried to help her, but the circumstances of her disappearance had made it difficult for anyone to intervene in time. The rancher felt both sorrow and determination. Sorrow for what had happened, and determination to ensure that her story would be told accurately and respectfully. He returned to the cabin multiple times, each visit bringing new insights. He noticed details he had missed before. A small book with the girl's handwriting, marks on the walls that suggested she had tried to leave messages, and other personal items that told the story of her life. He photographed these items carefully, documenting everything. He was not just looking for clues to the authorities. He was trying to understand her as a person.
Each discovery deepened his connection to her and strengthened his resolve. Meanwhile, he kept in close contact with local authorities, sharing what he had learned from the Apache community.
They worked together to cross-reference details, matching names, dates, and locations. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. The girl had been trying to find safety, attempting to navigate a complicated and often harsh world. She had sought help from people she trusted, but the circumstances had made it difficult for anyone to intervene in time.
Understanding this did not lessen the tragedy, but it did bring clarity and a sense of purpose. The rancher also learned about the land surrounding the cabin.
It was isolated, as he had noticed, with only a few paths leading in and out. This explained why no one had discovered her sooner. He felt a deep sense of responsibility for having found her, knowing that without his presence her story might have remained hidden for much longer. He thought about her family and the pain they must have felt, and he resolved to help them find closure. One day, he met a distant relative of the girl who had heard rumors about the cabin. This meeting was emotional. The relative described the girl's personality, her love for simple joys, and her dreams for the future. They spoke with tears in their eyes, grateful that someone had finally come forward to care about her story. The rancher listened with humility and empathy, realizing that the girl's life had touched many, even in her short time on Earth. He promised to honor her memory and ensure that her story would be told respectfully. As he continued investigating, he began to understand the broader context of her life. The girl had faced challenges that many outsiders could not fully comprehend.
Poverty, social barriers, and isolation had all played a role in her story. The rancher did not judge. Instead, he tried to understand, to see the world through her eyes.
He imagined her hopes, her fears, and the courage it must have taken to navigate her life. Each thought strengthened his commitment to uncovering the truth and sharing it with those who needed to know. One evening, as he returned to the cabin, the rancher discovered a small hidden detail that had been overlooked. A loose floorboard revealed a small collection of personal items, a notebook, a bracelet, and a few small trinkets.
These items were simple, yet they spoke volumes about the girl's life and personality. The rancher carefully documented everything, understanding that even the smallest details could bring comfort and understanding to her family and the community.
He also began speaking with neighbors who had lived in the area for decades. Some remembered seeing the girl on rare occasions, others had noticed the cabin's isolation. Slowly, he began piecing together a timeline matching memories with physical evidence from the cabin. The story was still incomplete, but each piece of information brought him closer to understanding the life that had been lost and the circumstances that had led to her tragic end.
Through all of this, the rancher found himself reflecting on life, mortality, and responsibility. He realized that the cabin, the land, and the girl's story had changed him.
He had always thought of his work as simple and honest, focused on the land and animals. But now, He understood that life also demanded empathy, action, and the courage to face difficult truths. The girl's story had become a guiding force, teaching him lessons he would carry forever. Weeks passed, and the investigation continued. The rancher maintained detailed records, photographs, and notes. He worked closely with the authorities, ensuring that every lead was followed, every question addressed. He also maintained his connection with the Apache community, checking in with elders and family members, listening carefully, and showing respect for their insights and emotions. Through this collaboration, the story of the girl became clearer, revealing a life that had been full of potential, resilience, and courage, even in the face of immense challenges. One day, a breakthrough came. A neighbor remembered seeing someone suspicious near the cabin around the time the girl disappeared. The rancher shared this information with the authorities, who began investigating further. This clue opened new avenues of inquiry and brought hope that the girl's story would be fully understood and that justice, or at least clarity, could be achieved. The rancher felt a mix of relief and determination. He knew there was still work to be done, but progress had been made. As Part 3 came to a close, the rancher stood outside the cabin at sunset. The forest glowed in warm hues of orange and gold, yet the weight of the story he was uncovering remained heavy. He looked at the cabin, the surrounding trees, and the quiet land, feeling both the burden and the honor of what had been entrusted to him. The girl's life, once hidden and silent, was slowly coming into focus, thanks to his persistence, respect, and care. There would be more conversations, more discoveries, and perhaps more surprises. But he also knew that the journey was meaningful. The girl's life, her struggles, and her story deserved to be known, and through his dedication, she would not be forgotten. Her memory would live on, and her story would finally reach those who needed to hear it. The rancher felt a quiet sense of hope and responsibility. He realized that uncovering the truth was not just about understanding the past, it was about honoring life, fostering compassion, and making sure that tragedy did not mean invisibility. The cabin, once a place of sorrow, was becoming a place of remembrance, learning, and respect. And in this process, the rancher discovered his own strength, empathy, and courage, ready to carry the story forward to its conclusion. The rancher woke early again, the memory of the girl still present in his thoughts, but with a new sense of purpose. Over the past weeks, he had learned more about her life than he could have imagined. He knew her routines, her family, and even the small joys that had made her smile. Yet, despite all he had discovered, he felt there was still one more step he needed to take to help her story reach its conclusion and ensure that her memory was honored properly. That morning, he drove to the town once more, determined to meet the girl's closest relatives and share what he had learned. The Apache community had been supportive, but he knew the family deserved a direct connection, someone to tell them what had happened in a careful and compassionate way. When he arrived, he was greeted with caution, understandable given the painful history. But his sincerity and respect were clear. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, letting the family know everything he had discovered. There were tears, of course. Tears for the girl they had loved, tears for the moments they would never have again, and tears of relief that someone had cared enough to uncover the truth. The rancher listened as the family shared stories of their own, memories that he had not yet known. Laughter mixed with sorrow as they recalled her small acts of kindness, her playful spirit, and her quiet courage. For the first time since her disappearance, the girl's life was being honored in full, not just remembered as a tragedy. The rancher knew he could not stop there. He had also gathered the information and clues that could help the authorities bring closure. Together, they began to follow leads, talking to neighbors, tracing the girl's final movements, and piecing together what had happened. It was a careful, respectful process. No one wanted to sensationalize her story. The goal was to understand and honor it. Each step revealed more context: who had tried to help her, what circumstances had led to her isolation, and how her life had intersected with the world around her. As they worked, the rancher noticed something remarkable. The community began to come together, supporting one another in ways he had not seen before. People shared memories, comforted each other, and even contributed information they had kept to themselves for years. The rancher realized that the girl's story, though tragic, had sparked something meaningful,
a sense of connection, empathy, and shared responsibility. Her life was no longer hidden, it had become a catalyst for understanding and healing.
One day, the rancher returned to the cabin with members of the family. Walking through the rooms together, they spoke softly, recalling details of her life, noting the items she had left behind, and touching objects that held memories. The cabin, once a place of sorrow and silence, became a space of remembrance. They placed flowers on the small table, carefully arranged personal items, and even left letters written to her memory. It was not a grand ceremony, but it was deeply heartfelt, filled with the quiet power of respect and love. The rancher realized that honoring her memory was not just about the past, it was also about the future. He began to think about how the cabin and the surrounding land could serve as a symbol of remembrance. Perhaps it could be a small memorial, a place where people could reflect on the importance of life, compassion, and community. He discussed this idea with the family, who agreed. Together, they planned a way to preserve the cabin and the land, ensuring that the girl's life would not be forgotten and that her story could inspire others.
Meanwhile, the investigation reached its conclusion. Authorities, guided by the rancher's careful documentation and the community's insights, were able to clarify the circumstances surrounding the girl's death. There was no intent to harm from anyone in the community. Instead, it became clear that isolation, miscommunication, and unfortunate circumstances had played a role. While it did not erase the tragedy, the clarity brought a sense of peace to the family and to the rancher. They finally understood what had happened and could begin to heal. As the days passed, the rancher continued to visit the cabin, now with a sense of calm rather than fear. He tended to the land, cleared paths, and maintained the space in a way that reflected the respect he felt for the girl's life. He often sat quietly on the porch, watching the sunlight move across the forest, reflecting on everything that had transpired. Each visit reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of empathy, compassion, and action. He also found that the experience had changed him personally. Life on the ranch, which had once been about routine and solitude, now felt richer, more connected. He saw the land not just as property but as part of a broader story, a place where life, memory, and community intersected. He understood that being entrusted with the girl's story was not a burden but an honor, a responsibility to carry forward with integrity and care. One afternoon, the rancher helped organize a small gathering at the cabin with the family and members of the Apache community. They shared stories of the girl, sang songs she had loved, and spoke about the importance of remembering her life fully. There was laughter and tears, silence and conversation, all intertwined in a meaningful, shared experience. The cabin, once a place of death and isolation, had been transformed into a space of life, memory, and community. The rancher also began documenting the process. He wrote down the sequence of events, the people involved, the lessons learned, and the insights gained. This documentation would serve multiple purposes. It would help the family, support the community, and potentially guide others who faced similar tragedies. He wanted the story to be remembered not just as a sad tale, but as an example of compassion, action, and the power of connection. Over time, the cabin became a quiet place of reflection. The rancher installed a small plaque in memory of the girl, carefully crafted with words chosen to honor her life and her spirit. Visitors were welcome to leave flowers, notes, or simply spend a moment in thought. The space became a bridge between the past and the future, a reminder that even in tragic circumstances, human kindness, empathy, and respect could create meaning and healing. The rancher also kept close ties with the family. He helped in practical ways, offering support for their needs and staying in contact regularly. His presence was a quiet reassurance that the girl's story would continue to be remembered and respected. He saw firsthand how his actions had made a difference, not just in uncovering the truth, but in providing comfort, clarity, and dignity to those who had loved her. As the weeks turned into months, the rancher reflected on the journey he had undertaken. What had started as a simple inheritance of a remote cabin had become so much more. A journey into human lives, into tragedy, and into the power of memory and respect. He had faced grief, sorrow, and difficult truths, but he had also witnessed courage, compassion, and community. The experience had changed him profoundly, giving him a deeper understanding of life, responsibility,
and the importance of standing for what is right. One evening he stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set over the forest. The light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows and warm glows.
The cabin, once a symbol of tragedy and silence, now held peace, memory, and honor. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the girl's life had been recognized, her story had been shared, and her memory preserved.
Though the pain of her loss remained, it had been transformed into something meaningful, something that could teach and inspire. In that moment, the rancher realized that life is unpredictable, and often, responsibility arrives in unexpected ways. A cabin abandoned and silent had brought him face to face with the fragility of life, the importance of empathy, and the power of action. He understood that even in the darkest moments, light could be found through care, respect, and commitment to others.
The girl's life, though brief, had left a lasting impact, and through his efforts it would continue to do so. As night fell, the rancher walked around the cabin one last time for the evening.
The forest was quiet, the stars beginning to appear in the sky. He paused, feeling a sense of closure and connection. He knew the journey was not about forgetting the tragedy, but about honoring the life behind it, ensuring that it would not be lost or ignored.
He had inherited more than a cabin. He had inherited a story, and he had fulfilled the responsibility with care, respect, and dedication.
The rancher returned to his home later that night, tired but fulfilled. He thought about the girl, the family, and the community. He thought about the lessons learned, the importance of empathy, the value of action, and the significance of remembering those who can no longer speak for themselves. He understood that life often gives us challenges we do not expect, but with courage and compassion, those challenges can become opportunities for meaning and connection.
As he lay down to sleep, he felt a quiet sense of peace.
The cabin, the girl, and the story he had uncovered were no longer sources of fear or sorrow. They had become symbols of life, memory, and hope. And though the world would always have its share of challenges, he knew that even small actions, guided by care and respect, could create lasting impact.
The girl's memory would live on, and he had played his part in ensuring that it would be honored, remembered, and cherished for years to come.